Here we go. Uh-oh. Where's the music? It ain't playing. That's pretty weird. Hey, Mr. Pond Boss, tell me what I need. Oh, okay, there we go. No music tonight. Anyway, I don't know what happened on that deal, but I blew it somehow. Looky there. I see Jean and Barbara Saunders checking in. Good evening, everybody. Bob Lusk, the Pond Boss. Dustin Crawley, howdy, buddy. Tim Stewart, I was hoping you'd be here. We're going to talk about Florida bass tonight a little bit. Yep. So, hey, you guys know the drill. I really appreciate you coming on to watch tonight. I got a kind of an entertaining topic and one that's pretty fun as well. I got to tilt my head back because I got trifocals. I see there's Jason. Hey, Jason Nipstead. Good to see you, my brother. So I'm going to find you guys here on this laptop so I can watch it with you. Oh, there it is. I see it. Now I just got to turn the speaker off so we don't have to listen to me talk over myself. Now, if it will call up. Hey, you guys know the drill here. Hashtag Pond Boss Magazine. Holy cow, I got to make sure I'm looking at the right one. I think I am, yep. Ron Arduin. Hashtag Pond Boss Magazine in the comment section. Click like, share this video to your timeline. You're eligible for a drawing for a Pond Boss hat and a Pond Boss mug. It knows how to keep hot things hot and cold things cold. I got a feeling that Jacob West, I know Jacob loves that little saying there, and Jacob and his dad are traveling back from Illinois. They're probably, if they didn't stop for the night, they're probably somewhere in the middle of Oklahoma, maybe McAllister through there somewhere. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, I don't know. But anyway, I'm so glad you folks are joining me tonight. Let me see who all we got here. I see John Funk. John, I know you sent me an email. I don't remember if I replied to it or not, but I'll get to it here in a day or two if I haven't. Kim Moore, Mike Cottrell, good to see you guys. Todd Austin, Tom Blaisdell, Chrissy Cheppel. Yep, John, we are healthy. I appreciate those comments. I thought tonight the topic last week was pretty energetic, and we covered it pretty well. But I wanted to hit it a little bit more. It's gotten me thinking quite a bit. As a matter of fact, I wrote an article today about whether or not you should stock Florida bass into your existing fishery. Well, I didn't want to rely totally on my opinions and my experience, so I called some guys that do this stuff for a living as well. I called two recently retired Parks and Wildlife guys. One of them, Alan Forsagi, ran the Freshwater Fisheries Center over in Athens, Texas. If you've never been there, it's worth the trip. Now, I know they've been closed down doing some remodeling during the corona crisis, so before you go, call over there and make sure they're open. But they've got some outstanding displays. They've got some really, really, really good stuff. So I called and talked to Alan because he was working for the Parks and Wildlife when they stocked the very first Florida bass in private waters and then stocking them into Lake Fork way back in the 70s. So I wanted to get his opinions about some things, and I called Dave Terry, who works for the Parks and Wildlife now, and he spearheads some of the stocking programs of Florida bass for the state of Texas as well. So I wanted to take a little time and get those alternative opinions, and come to find out they're pretty parallel with the way I think about it. So I'm going to tell you something about what they've said. I want to scroll back here and make sure I'm not missing anybody. Let's see here. Dustin, howdy, you really love to learn about. We're going to talk about big old Florida strain bass here in a minute. Jimmy Hammonds, you got it. Hashtag Pond Boss Magazine. Click like. Oh, hey, I got something pretty cool in the mail. I opened a package up yesterday. Of course, you got to be careful about opening packages nowadays, I hear. And I got this deal here. Look at that. How cool is that from Purina? It's a face mask. You can put it on your face. I meant to have it on to show it to you guys, which is pretty cool. Hey, I've been doing a fun little hobby. Look at this. I've been doing some wood carving. Look at my little hillbilly I carved last night. Been taking wood carving lessons. If any of you guys or gals are close to here and you'd like to take up that hobby, we're doing it at my office on Tuesday nights. It's really, really fun. Here, look at this again. Carved that out of a blank piece of wood. It was roughly cut out, but I got to carve that little hillbilly. Next week I'll paint it, and then I'll show you what it is, because it's really fun. Pretty cheap Christmas gifts too, by the way. There's Victor Moberg. Ken Dowd checking in from York Springs. Good to see Victor and Ken both. Travis Small-Smith. Good afternoon, sir. David Schneiderman, one of our sponsors with Easy Dock. If you want to look at floating docks, you know what? I'm going to come at that a little different. If you have a pond that fluctuates levels, a floating dock is a good way to go. Check out Easy Docks of Texas. Our friend David Schneiderman here, and he'll tell you about it. Jimmy Hammond's Youngsville, Louisiana. Let's see what else we got. Ron Ardway, I got to see Ron. Justin Shank checking in from the left coast. Travis got a shipment of Purina Aquamax MVP. Good deal. All the fish are growing and checking in. Bill Russell, Lower Alabama. Kevin Moore from Central Illinois. Harrison Davis from Georgia. You know what? It was cool here today, too. My gosh, we had sporadic rainfall. I got to go striper fishing Monday at Lake Texoma, which, believe it or not, you know, even though I'm the pond boss, I get a much, much bigger kick out of you guys catching fish that I helped you raise than if I catch those fish. Well, so I don't go fishing a whole lot, but I like to spend time watching you guys catch fish. But I did get to go striper fishing with Striper Express, who've been friends of ours for a long, long time. Debbie, the queen of Lusk Lodge Kamatu and the Pond Boss, she's been wanting to take some of her longtime high school buddies fishing. So we booked a trip and went on Monday. We caught 28 striped bass and some white bass, some sand bass. So now we've got about 25 pounds of fillets we got split between us. So we're going to be cooking some fish later on. Look here, Jason Nebstad says our bass under 2 pounds are healthy, but the larger bass are skinny. Wondering if the lack of habitat for predator fish could be the problem. Also, the bluegill don't get very big. You know, Jason, I'll tell you something. With your lake, I noticed that your bluegill haven't been getting very big. So what you guys need to do is your bluegill get to be about 4 or 5 inches, and they begin to reproduce. And when that happens, their growth rates pretty much shut down. So I think I would be telling some folks to be feeding the bluegills off their docks. If somebody's willing to feed, even if it's just a little bit, even if it's a pound of fish food a day, they don't even have to have a fish feeder. If they'll feed those bluegills, you'll start to see them grow bigger and gain weight. Now, what'll happen, Jason lives on a lake in Fayetteville, North Carolina, about 125 acres. With these small bluegills manning the nests, their offspring, if they can live long enough, are going to have to grow bigger than the existing bluegills to dominate for those spawning beds. So I would expect the next generation to get even bigger. Now, I would kind of expect the first stocked bluegills, because they drew their lake down, eradicated a bunch of fish, the lake is filled back up, got new space, new cover, new structure. I don't know why the larger bass are thin, other than there were some fish that were left over that have some age on them. So the bass under 2 pounds are your youngest fish that you hope are going to be gaining weight. I know you told me you were going to stock some Threadfins. I hope you did that. So I'm going to buzz through the comments right quick. Need a strain of largemouth bass that can see in muddy water, said John Funk. You know what? I'm going to tell you something about that. There's a concept in fisheries management that everybody needs to understand. It's called plasticity. Plasticity is a fish's ability to adjust to its environment rather than us being forced to adjust the environment for that fish. So here's where I'm going with that. John has got a really muddy pond in Michigan, and he's worried that his largemouth bass can't see to eat, which is the truth. Well, some bass that are hatched in there will have the propensity to survive in that environment. It's just like if you took your bass and put them into a stream and let them spawn, some of the offspring would be able to thrive in that environment where the rest won't. Whereas if you took that same bass and spawned them in your pond, some of the offspring from that spawn could figure out how to play the game in your pond and others won't. So what happens with largemouth bass, those that have that propensity to survive in muddy waters and can't depend on vision to be able to eat, they will detect movement by their lateral lines. When pressure changes in the water and there's movement, what will happen is those fish will go toward that movement, and when they get close enough and they can see it, then they'll feed. So some of the bass in that muddy water will actually thrive in it. I mean, I've seen double-digit bass come out of water that visibility, it looked like chocolate milk with a red tint, and you couldn't see 6 inches. So that can happen. Dave Weber checking in. Another 4 inches of rain today and still raining. That makes right at 15 inches of rain the past 13 days. Ponds overflowing. Yeah, that's, you know what, this time of year with that much rain, that's a huge amount of rain. Hey, there's John Wilson. Man, you can't go watch baseball today. Hey, Landon Wyatt. There's Landon. He's with Aquafix. John Wilson is in the pond management business in Ohio, Aqueduct. Check him out. And Landon Wyatt is with Aquafix Natural Lake Biosciences. Landon's role is to help take water, expedite the process of cleansing that water to help prevent things like blue-green algae. So, friend Landon, if you're wanting to learn more about how to use beneficial microbes to make your water happier. Look at there. There's Jennifer Ardwan. Good to see you. Good to see you, girl. Man, you got a good life going on there. Danny Mac. Danny Mac's on the phone today. Let's see here. We got Scott Sumner checking in from Sylvester, Georgia. Peanut capital of the world. Yeah, I remember when Jimmy Carter was president of the United States and his brother Billy, peanut farmer. His big deal is he wanted to sell Billy beer. All right, Harrison Davis got a conversation. Michael Eric checking in. Just reset on a snapping turtle trap. I'm going to reset another here in a few minutes. Then I will be on full tune. Well, Michael's really, really active managing ponds as a hobby in Iowa. There's Roger Peterson from Missouri checking in. Good to see Roger. He's in central Missouri. Ken Dowd, besides draining and or dredging, what are effective ways of reducing muck accumulation? Oh my gosh, holy cow, check in with Landon. Hey Landon, check out Ken Dowd. You can talk to him about it. Aeration system runs, is muck away or bacteria blocks? You know what, Ken, your timing's perfect. Landon Wyatt is in the house. He will comment to you and send you a message. And actually, Landon, put it public so everybody can see it. And Landon can take you through that process. All right, I'm caught up on the comments. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about growing trophy fish. So the question at hand was, should we stock Florida strain largemouth bass into an existing bass pond? So I'm going to take you through the thought process. And then first of all, I'm going to offer up some other opinions that I don't necessarily agree with or disagree with. But here's the way the state of Texas has approached that. The state of Texas figured out back in the 70s and 80s that Florida bass would survive very well in Texas. Now here's what Florida bass need. Florida largemouth bass need warm water. They don't like cold water. Now, it's not so much that they can't live in cold water, they can't thrive in cold water, but I tell you what will kill them is if the water temperature drops rapidly, they can't metabolize, they can't process their own body fat rapidly enough to keep up with the speed of how cold your water gets, how fast. So, I remember the winter of 1983-84, we had a really hard Arctic cold snap where water temperatures went from the 60s into the 30s in 3 days. It killed Florida largemouth bass from North Texas all the way down south to the Rio Grande Valley. I personally picked up a 15-pound bass out of a private 20-acre lake south of Houston, Texas, after things thawed out. But what happened was that front blew through, didn't get above freezing. I think the high most of those days were in the mid-20s and the low was in the teens or 8 or 9 degrees. And that's really, really cold for Texas. Well, it happened so fast that it dropped the temperature so fast that those Florida strain bass couldn't adjust to it, and it killed them all the way to the coast. And I mean, it killed them all over, and it affected the biggest fish the most. Then we had another cold front do the same thing in 1989. So when that 1989 one hit, that's when I started suggesting to people that you stock a mix of Florida strain bass, northern strain bass, put them in the pond, let them grow up, and then whatever can survive the climate is what's going to dominate. Now, to this day, I still think that's pretty good advice. But the question at hand was, should we add more Florida bass? So now, one of the questions, let's see here. So one of the questions was, should we stock pure strain Florida bass? I'm going to tell you, I think the consensus is yes. Now, here's the way the Parks and Wildlife Department did it. they're charged with protecting and improving the resources, natural resources of the state of Texas. So they have over 800 public reservoirs, everything from city ponds to Toledo Bend Reservoir to Lake Texoma, right here where I live. And what they decided they would do early on is genetically test the genetics and see where they were. So out of 100 bass that they sampled, they wanted at least 20 of those bass, or 20% of the fish, to have some level of the Florida allele in their genes, in their chromosomes. So their first goal was, we want to get at least 20% of the bass to have Florida alleles. Well, it didn't take them long to do that, 8 or 10 years, which in fisheries, that's not that long. And so they hit that, and then they started thinking, well, my gosh, we've got these different lakes that didn't have any Florida strain bass. Now we've got them, and pretty soon those lakes are starting to produce some double-digit fish. And then they started to enter what they call the share-a-lunker program, where bass 13 pounds and larger are shared with the Freshwater Fishery Center in Athens, where they can spawn those fish and then genetically select, and breed with a big male Florida bass and that giant female, and then take the offspring and then put them back in different lakes around the state of Texas. So what they're doing now, that I completely agree with, is they've hit that 20% mark. So now it's how do we stock fish that we think can grow up and add bigger bass or more trophy bass to the system. So the process that we think about in private waters is, should we add Florida bass to ensure the health of our gene pool? Well, if you started with Florida strain bass and you've got Florida strain bass, there's no reason to stock more Florida strain bass. Unless you want to take some bass from improved parentage, put them in there with the chance of some of those fish surviving to adulthood and a few of those making it on up into trophy status, which in today's, trophy status for somebody else might be 4 pounds, but might be 8 for you, might be 12 for somebody else. And so the mission first was to make sure that there's Florida genes in the system. Now and imagine this, you stocked your pond with half Floridas and half natives 8 years ago. Well, here we are 8 years later, and those original fish are reaching their peaks. They're getting about as big as they're going to get. They can grow some more, but they're going to reach their peaks. And the best of the best, if they survived, are those fish that are now trophy fish in your lake. Now, as long as they reproduce with the best genetics, then their offspring are going to be great as well. But the odds of that happening are low. Now, here we are 8 years later. That means that they spawn some of them spawn in year 2, most spawn in year 3, all of them spawn in year 4. So now we've got offspring from all these fish that have reproduced 2 or 3 times. Now stay with me here, because offspring of the offspring of the offspring, there's no guarantees that they're going to be the quality of the fish you started with. Now that doesn't mean the gene pool has deteriorated. Think about it like this. Those of you that are dog breeders and you breed labs, for example, you take the best mama and the best daddy and you breed them, you get a litter of 8 puppies. How many of them are great? 2? How many of them are superior? 3? That leaves 3 that aren't. Well, bass are the same way. But those 3 that aren't in your Florida bass population are going to be reproducing with others that aren't. So your odds of having a trophy bass coming out of the offspring goes down. That right there is a reason to stock Florida bass in the year 3 or year 4 and again in year 5. And you're going to spend a little bit of money, but if your mission is to grow trophy largemouth bass, then you need to think about the enhancement of your gene pool. Now, it's not because you want to make the existing gene pool better. It's because you want to add some fish from another known gene pool, which means you got to know your source. So before you buy those Florida bass, talk to your supplier. Make sure they're reputable. Talk to somebody like Sean McNulty over at American Sportfish Hatchery. You know, that's what he does for a living. He grows Florida largemouth bass, F1 tiger bass. Call and talk to him and then listen to what he's got to say, because if you're wanting to grow some really huge bass and keep it ongoing, and in the article today, one of the things I pointed out was that the state of Texas record was set in 1992. That's 28 years ago. The Mississippi record was set 25 years ago. The Alabama record was set almost 30 years ago. Why haven't those records been broken? Is it because of the genetics? Well, you can hedge your bets with that, but I'm going to tell you more. Alan Forsagi was telling me, retired from the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. He was talking to me today. He said, I think by far the biggest deal is making sure they've got the right food. You can't just go stock a new pond and expect 3 or 4 years to go by and presto changeo, you're catching 10-pound bass. You know, if you don't have a real active program to grow the most forage fish that you can, while you're culling the underperformers and smaller fish that don't fit your program, then you can expect to have 1 or 2 trophies, but don't expect to grow very many trophies. So I want you to think about that. If you guys truly want to grow huge fish, it can be bluegill, it can be smallmouth bass, it can be walleyes, it can be yellow perch. It can be largemouth bass. I'm just talking about largemouth bass because that's the topic right now. You know, and don't think that genetics is the only deal. You got to have the best habitat and the best food chain. That's why some of these guys of means will build hatchery ponds right next to their fishing lake, and they may grow 3 crops of forage fish each year, and the mission is to keep feeding their biggest fish, you know, as they're culling their smallest fish. Now, when should you stock those little Florida bass fingerlings? Well, I think the smartest time to stock them is before your bass spawn. Now that depends a little bit on your latitude. You know, when you're in Louisiana, it might be a little harder to get Florida bass before your bass spawn. But if you live in Oklahoma or Tennessee or North Carolina, you can easily get bass that have been spawned before your bass even hatch and give them even a bigger advantage. And if you're wanting to add some Florida bass, I think it's appropriate to make sure that you've got the best habitat, the best cover. Release those baby bass into habitat for baby bass. And if you don't have habitat, provide it. If you could buy advanced fingerlings, that's even better. But don't wait till fall. Get them as soon as they get to be 6 or 7 or 8 inches long, which usually is about right now. This year's been a little weird, so it may be another month or 6 weeks before you can get some that are 6 or 8 inches long. You know, so I'm kind of going here. I'm kind of running around in circles a little bit, but be sure that you make room and that you have food. I mean, you're not going to take a herd of camels that's on the desert if they ain't got nothing to eat. Don't do that to your Florida bass. If that means that you need to get out there and cull 20 bass per acre in your 10-acre lake, go cull 20 bass per acre. Make sure you've got habitat for them. Even if you need to stock a few more bait fish, stock a few more bait fish. If you're going to go buy 1,000 largemouth bass to put in that 10-acre lake, go buy 100 pounds of minnows and stock them in there at the same time. And turn your bass loose in different areas where little bitty bass can hide and survive. So that's where I'm going from here. Let me see what else we got here. Landon put up his email address so you guys can message him. Tim Herbert. We put all big females in and a healthy supply of hybrid bluegill, fat-headed minnows, and crawfish. Largemouth bass eat the hybrid bluegill all day. That's good. Now, the thing about hybrid bluegill is they're hybrids, so they don't reproduce, and which is not exactly true. They reproduce a little bit, but when they reproduce, they reproduce in light numbers, and they don't grow very fast. So hybrid bluegill cannot support largemouth bass. Now, bluegills can, because bluegill will spawn several times a year. Travis Paul Smith, with the coronavirus on the rise, is the pondology in October still on the go? Yeah. I tell you what we've done. We've scheduled it. We got the date set aside. But I've told everybody that we're going to have to be flexible, because what I don't want to do is I don't want to bring a group of guys in and put anybody at risk. So what I'm thinking about doing right now, which I don't really want to do it this way, because I'm thinking about bringing in like 5 or 6 guys at a time and doing it back to back rather than having 10 or 12 at one time. The upside of that is we stand less risk of anybody getting sick. But the downside is one of the big attractions for the pondology course is that everybody gets to talk to each other. I mean, you can talk to Tim Stewart up here. He'll tell you, he was there in the one in October. One of the biggest deals was people made new friends, and different folks with similar objectives can exchange ideas above and beyond what I get to teach you and what all the other speakers get to teach you. So at this point, I've got it scheduled, but it's in pencil. Let's do it that way. Tim Herbert says, how can we repeat this podcast? Well, I'm not going to repeat it, but I tell you what we will do. We will save it, and Leanne will upload it to YouTube and link it through the Pond Boss website here in a few days. Can the public purchase fry from Texas Parks and Wildlife? No, they can't. They can't do that. And the reason they can't is because they're they are charged with protecting the natural resources of Texas, and they raise somewhere between 6 and 8 million Florida bass fingerlings every year. And I tell you something that they're doing that's pretty cool that I wish we could do in the private sector. They've got a genetic lab where they can take a fish, and you guys will love this story. There was a sheralunker, a 13-plus pound bass caught in Marine Creek Lake, which is a tiny impoundment on the north side of Fort Worth, Texas. They were able to take that fish, cut a fin off of it, use it to reproduce at the Freshwater Fisheries Center, use the offspring to stock back into Marine Creek and then other lakes, whatever they chose. But they know what the lineage is. They know the mother and they know the father. The mother was a sheralunker that came from Lake Conroe like 5 or 6 years ago, which is very, very cool to know. So now the genetic studies and histology of genetics is so refined to the point that they can take these bigger fish, pull some genetic code on them, and find out if that fish came from fish that they stocked in there. And not only that they stocked them in there, but where did mommy and daddy come from? Which that's a little scary, but it's a good deal. But they're not going to sell any fish. Now what they will do, and I don't know if they're going to continue to do this or not, but what they've done in the past is they've signed several agreements with private landowners where the landowner signs over all their rights to the lake so the Parks and Wildlife Department can study it for 10 years. So you give up all your rights to doing anything with that lake. You can't manage it. You don't have any control over harvest. You can fish it, but you can't bring any guests. Now I'm speaking a little bit out of school, but they have 100% control over what happens with the management of that lake. So they do have some private contracts with some folks. Now, some of these are utility companies. The utility companies don't care about those lakes, where they go reclaim a coal mine or something and there's a lake there. Well, that's where some of that is, but they'll do some of that. All right, so Jeff Thompson asks, if adding 8-inch F1s to an existing pond in April, when would you seine the bluegill hatchery pond to add extra food for the new bass? I would tell you this, Jeff, if you have that hatchery pond and it's been going for a year, I'd harvest it in the spring and take out the baby fish, leave enough adult fish behind so they can reproduce, and then harvest it again in the fall and leave enough, not baby fish, but adult fish, leave enough adult fish behind so they can reproduce. So in other words, like for example, I seined a 1/10 acre pond that I've been feeding for 18 months. I seined it in April. I was going to do it last fall, but didn't get to it. Well, actually, that's not true. I did seine. I took out 4,000 baby fish out of a 10th acre pond. Baby bluegill, meaning like this, 2 inches, 1.25 to 2 inches, up to about 4 inches long. I took those out and went and stocked my son's lake with those, my son's pond. And then in the spring, we took out, I mentioned this in an earlier podcast, but we took out 12,000 plus babies. We took out 400 medium-sized bluegill that were 3 to 4.5 inches long. We took out another 500 plus that were bigger than 5 inches, and I left about 40 adults behind to reproduce. And that pond is now full of baby fish. So, to answer your question, I would be seining the bluegill hatchery pond. If you started it this spring, I'd be feeding the heck out of those fish, and I'd be taking baby fish out in the fall, and then again in the spring, and leave enough adults behind so they can reproduce and replenish the stock again. All right, Brock Rand, Dan Snyder, Florida. Yep, Jacob West. I was kind of guessing you guys were probably between Muskogee and McAllister, depending on how much time you spent at the museum there in Springfield or Bass Pro Shops in Springfield. David Schneiderman says, what is good baby bass habitat? Anything that's dense. Dense meaning, if you think dense like a cedar tree, or dense like a beaver lodge, or dense like a brush pile. That's what baby fish love. Now, keep in mind that baby fish don't have a lot of body fat, so they got to eat. So if they're around dense habitat, especially woody habitat, or like American pondweed or eelgrass or rock piles, there's groups of periphyton growing on all that stuff. And the baby bluegills can derive some nourishment from that. Now, if you want to speed up that process, you can feed one of the Purina feeds that's designed for fingerling fish, like some of the Aquamax fry starter feeds. And here we are, we're 7 o'clock. We're going to do a commercial right quick. Hey, Pond Boss Magazine, $35 a year. You guys have heard me say this over and over. Cheaper than a Friday night date and lasts a year. $35. This is the upcoming issue. I'm working on the September-October issue. I'm about 5 articles away from being finished with that one. Here's a story Mike Otto wrote about how to harness water. You know, when he's building a lake and there's water flowing through the site, he's got to figure out what to do with that water until he can build a dam to capture it. So he can't have water standing in front of the dirt while he's working on it. Here's an article in here that Dr. Wes Neal, fisheries biologist, extension specialist over at Mississippi State. Are you a high voltage manager? You have your own electrofishing boat. He's going to talk you out of it, which that's probably a pretty good idea. I don't want to hear about somebody getting electrocuted. Let's see. So anyway, $35. And also, you know what? I want to take a minute and say thank you to Purina Mills for sponsoring this show. I deeply appreciate them. But at the same time, if they didn't have great fish foods, we wouldn't be endorsing their fish foods. They have got the best fish foods on the market. MVP is by far the best fish food for sport fish management. It's fish meal-based fish food. It grows anything from little bitty bluegills to feed-trained largemouth bass. So that's a really, really good food. Texas Hunter feeders. I don't know if Chris Blood's, he hadn't checked in yet, but if he checks in, Texas Hunter feeders, best feeder company on the market. Now, they're not cheap, but they're great. If you want a fish feeder that'll last 8 or 10 years with very little headaches, that's the feeder. Not only are the products good, the customer service is good. Look here, I got a timer laying right here. I got a timer that burned up somehow. I don't know how it did it, but I emailed Chris, and I had one the next day. And I'm going to send this one back to him so he can see what went wrong with it, and then he'll let me know. Frank James checking in from Louisiana. Bob, is there good evidence that F1s are easier to catch on lures than pure Florida largemouth? Absolutely right. Now, that's something that's pretty important to know, guys. Florida largemouth bass are fickle. Here, this is pretty funny. When I started messing with Florida largemouth bass around 1985, stocked a pretty good sized lake for a guy, and we got him from Glenn Lau. If you've never heard of the movie called Big Mouth, check that movie out. It was the first movie shot with underwater footage that showed the behavior patterns of Florida strain largemouth bass. And Glenn Lau is the guy that put that together. Well, Glenn also raised a few fingerlings, and we were able to get several thousand fingerlings to stock this 60-acre lake back around 85 or 86. So those fish grew really, really well. And after about 5 years, I could take my shocker boat over there, and we're shocking up a handful of 10-pound bass. Well, the owner was a little irritated because he couldn't catch them. Well, I started hearing that from a number of landowners as time went on. And really all I did was say, well, you know what? They don't get that big by not eating. That just means you suck. Learn to fish. Well, when Mark McDonald started Pond Boss, he and I did a couple of road trips, and one of them we went through Alabama up to Georgia and then circled back through and met some Pond Boss readers to get stories, and we stopped at American Sportfish Hatchery and spent time with Don Keller and Mary Smith back then. And it was in March, so they'd collected their broodfish, and they were getting ready to sort them out and pair them off and spawn them. And even back then, they had all those fish tagged, so they knew which fish was which. They knew where they came from. They knew the genetic codes. They knew which ones were pure strain Floridas, which ones were pure strain natives. So they knew which fish that they were going to cross. And I just posed the question. I said, man, I've been getting some questions from landowners, and they're saying they cannot catch their Florida bass. And I've been hearing the rumors that Florida bass behave differently than northern strain largemouth bass. And Don says, they do. And I said, really? He says, yeah, come here and watch this. So he led me over, and he had these two big, probably 5,000-gallon round tanks. And in one tank, they had the majority of their Florida strain largemouth. I mean, bass up to 9, 10 pounds. Just these rotund, huge, beautiful Florida strain bass. And then in the next one, they had their northern strain bass, which they weren't that big, but body condition was excellent. They'd been fed well. Well, they fed them goldfish. They'd buy goldfish from a fish farmer, a bait fish farmer in Arkansas, and that's what they would feed to their broodfish. So Don went over and he got a 5-gallon bucket and dipped up some goldfish, and he walked over to the Florida bass fat and he said, watch this. And he reached down in the bucket, had a little bitty one of those aquarium dip nets, the fine mesh dip nets, and he got a dip net, and he reached in, he got about 5 small 2-inch goldfish, threw them in that vat of Florida bass. Those goldfish started kind of swimming in circles, and you could tell they were fearful because they knew they were going to get eaten. But those Florida bass turned real slow, looked at them, approached them real easy, and it was almost like a pack of coyotes slowly coming up, looking at those fish. And then in a minute, when that goldfish turned, a bass would turn, open its mouth, suck it in. And he said, now watch this. Now we watched it for 15 minutes, and they slowly consumed about 10 or 12 of those goldfish. He said, now watch this. And he took the whole bucket, probably 15 pounds of goldfish, probably 2,000 goldfish, and threw them into that tank all at once. And those goldfish scattered in every direction. Those Florida bass did not move. When the goldfish settled down, then the bass would turn slowly, look at them, almost just like they're stalking them, get close, and then all of a sudden they'd make the move and they'd suck that thing down. He said, now watch this. So we go over to the northern strain bass tank, and he threw 5 or 6 of them. Those things didn't even hit the water. Those northern strain bass were so aggressive, it was like piranha in a feeding frenzy. They hit them just about as fast as they hit the water. Now there were those goldfish over in the Florida tank, and Don said, well, you know what? He said, we can come back in the morning. There'll still be 5 or 6 goldfish in this tank. Over here, watch. So he takes the bucket and he throws the whole bucket in there, and I mean within 10 minutes, it's a frenzy. There's northern strain bass jumping all over each other trying to eat those goldfish, and within 15 or 20 minutes, they were all gone. So that's when it dawned on me that their behavior patterns are different. Florida strain largemouth bass act differently. So the F1s are a hybrid cross that show the hybrid vigor of both fish. So northern strain largemouth don't get nearly as big. They grow faster the first couple of years, but after the 3rd year, the Florida bass catch them and then pass them up. Florida strain bass get way bigger than northern strain bass. Now, I'm not going to tell you that northern strain bass can't hit double digits. That's not true, but it's so rare that when it happens, it makes the news. And so, but Florida bass, we expect them to hit double digits. So the answer to your question is F1s, there's good evidence. Now I'm going to give you anecdotal evidence because I don't know that any university has researched this empirically, but I'm going to tell you F1s are considerably more aggressive than Florida strain largemouth bass. Now that doesn't mean that you won't catch a Florida bass. That what it means is that you have to use completely different tactics when you're fishing for a Florida strain bass. You know, and the catch-22 is you may see that fish on a graph, but you're going to have to work to make it bite your hook. You're going to have to present it in a way that it wants to eat it. You know, and most of the time when somebody catches a giant Florida bass, it's because that fish was hungry at that moment. And if you think about it, they're not hungry all the time. You know, the bigger bass eat a bigger meal. A 12-pound largemouth bass is not going to spend the energy to go eat 2 pounds of 3-inch bluegill or threadfin shad. It would rather go eat a 1.5 pound gizzard shad or a 2-pound bass or a 1.25 pound catfish or a snake than it would that many bluegills, because it doesn't want to spend the energy on it. Brock Wren, should we do restocking of bluegill or any type of shad for our bass annually or every few years? Don't know much about tilapia, or if they will just create a separate issue down the road. Here's my opinion of that. If you're wanting to grow trophy bass, part of your job is to monitor the volume, the amount, and the mass of your bait fish compared to your game fish. Now, that takes a little work. When you say it fast, it sounds pretty easy. Do you have enough bait fish? Well, how do you know that? There's several ways. You can continually weigh and measure enough bass that you can see their growth trends. As long as they're on an upward growth trend, then you've likely got enough enough bait fish for that size bass. But when they level off at that size class, they're running out of food. You know, the other way is to monitor your forage base. Now, what some guys do is they'll electrofish their ponds twice a year, once in the spring, once in the fall. You know, and you can tell by the body condition of your bass and the number of size classes of your forage fish. Do you have a variety of numbers of threadfin shad, a variety of sizes of gizzard shad, a variety of sizes of tilapia, of bluegill, you have crawfish? If you can find all those and kind of quantify and qualify, then you can make that choice. But I know this. Now listen to this. I know this. 9 times out of 10 in a trophy bass pond, when fish aren't growing to their potential, is because they're out of food. So, you got to have pretty deep pockets to want to grow trophy bass, because it takes some work. You got to be sure that they have what they need to eat when they need to eat it. A 3-pound bass is not going to grow to 4 pounds if it's going to depend on 2-inch bluegill to make a living. It's got to have bigger bait fish. So part of your strategy of your pond management is, how do I take care of the best fish if you truly want to grow trophies? And that's part of the reason that I have a job, is because most people don't know how to figure that out. And so if we can figure that out for that lake, then we can do some periodic stockings of the right types of fish at the right sizes at the right times to selectively feed those fish. So in other words, if you go feed crawfish, you go buy just random, and of course in South Louisiana, go get all the crawfish you want. You can get them for 50 cents a pound, 90 cents a pound. That bang is worth the buck. But if you got to spend $4 a pound to get them to North Texas or Nashville, Tennessee, or Fayetteville, North Carolina, that bang might not be worth the buck compared to something else that you can do. And plus, crawfish, you're going to be feeding any bass that are above 10 inches long. And most of the time, in a pond that's developing and has some trophy fish, that 10-inch bass is usually not an asset unless its relative weight is 120 or better. Now, what that means is it's 20% bigger than it should be. Holy cow, it's 7:15 almost. I wish y'all could talk to me. I'm talking too much. So Jonathan Stoddard asks, okay, I want to go back to Brock Wren's. Don't know much about tilapia, or if they will just create a separate issue. Where tilapia create a separate issue is if they don't die in the winter. So if your pond temperature doesn't drop to 52 or below, tilapia could be a problem. We want tilapia to die. We want them to go to heaven, because then they don't become a problem. You're not trading problems. Tilapia serve a really good purpose in pond management, especially growing trophy bass, because they increase survival rates of bluegills. But if you're in a spot, say if you draw a line east and west through Waco, Texas, to Alexandria, Louisiana, to Montgomery, Alabama, to south of it, say Eastman, Georgia, to the coast, south of that line, if they stand a chance to make it through the winter, I'd be hesitant to stock tilapia. Jonathan says, how many bluegill is too many in a bass pond? We have a 1+ acre pond in East Texas with an improving bass population. Well, let's see here. How many bluegill are too many? You know what? I run across that maybe once every 1,000 ponds. Now, when you have too many bluegill, what happens is you've got lots of bluegill that are 4 to 6 inches long. Reproduction is stopped. Bass recruitment is stopped. And the bass are stunted and underweight. That's when you know you have too many bluegill. The solution for that is to trap some out, seine some out, or stock some bass big enough to eat that size class of bluegill. Now, see, Ron's got a question, but I remember back here he asked one and I missed it. So I'm going to scroll back and find that. I've got 10-inch bluegill and tons more of all sizes. I see a few bass, but feeding on bluegill, but still cannot catch them. Ron's been having a problem trying to catch his bass. So, you know, I'm going to tell you this, that they're either so full they won't bite, or they may be a little bit undercrowded. I'd be looking for signs of river otters. I mean, that's a real potential for you over there, Ron. You can see some bass feeding on bluegill. The part of the reason you can't catch those bass is they're not hungry. They get all the food they want. You know, so, I mean, that's the simple answer. There's probably one's a little more complicated. Let me see here. Ron, I did foul hook a good bass at my neighbor's pond was wearing a mask. I'm not sure how you hooked it. You must have foul hooked it. You know, those are called corona bass. I've seen some. And the masks that they've got, they're keeping them from getting that coronavirus. So that's good. Hats off to those bass. I'm not sure how they get those damn masks on, but they did it. Good stuff, man. Let's see, Harrison Davis, this question is a little bit off, but related. If you put a genetically superior female largemouth bass in a 100-gallon aquarium with excellent water quality, all the high-quality food she can consume, and provide great care, how big would you guess you would get to in a 100-gallon aquarium? 5 pounds. You know, here's the thing. Here's the thing about that. Now, you guys that have watched this show forever know this. It takes 10 pounds of bait fish, it takes 10 pounds of food for the next trophic level to gain a pound. Now, what you don't know is how much it takes for that fish to maintain that pound. Now, you know, several of us are doing some research on that to try to figure it out. I'm going to tell you my guesstimate. I think it takes 20 to 30 pounds of bait fish to maintain a pound, as that bass uses 10 of those pounds to gain 1 pound of weight. So I think in reality, it may take 20 to 30 pounds of bait fish to keep a bass on an upward trend of gaining a pound. You know, and so, Harrison, to answer yours, in a 100-gallon aquarium with excellent water quality, all the high quality, she's going to be more restricted by space. And if you keep feeding the food and your filter works right and all that kind of stuff, I'd say in 100 gallons, 5 pounds is probably it. So here comes Will Lansett. He wants to negotiate a deal. If I subscribe to Pond Boss Magazine, will you send the previous issues from the same year? Oh, man, yeah, I will. Just, hey, email me. I tell you what, info@pondboss.com, Will, and say, hey, I want to subscribe to the magazine and send the issues from the same year. I'll do that, yep. Now, here's the counter deal. Subscribe for 2 years. It's worth it, I'm telling you. Hey, Pond Boss, Robert Hudson says, how big can native bluegill get eating Aquamax twice a day? I'm in middle Georgia. All things considered, I'll tell you this, Robert. I know you can get them to 1.5 pounds. I've seen that happen over and over and over and over. And I think with some patience and some consistent feeding, a little bit of culling, and some crowded bass in there, you can, in middle Georgia, you can get a number of them over 2 pounds, which is huge. And on occasion, in the right circumstance, you can get some over 2 pounds. Mike Cottrell, when you buy bass off one of the fish trucks that show up in different feed stores, what strain of bass are you likely to get? Well, here's the way those fish trucks work. They go buy from the bigger fish hatcheries. Most of them come out of Arkansas. And there's 3 or 4 really big fish hatcheries that the fish trucks go to. So when you order the fish, don't just wait for the truck to show up. call the fish farm. Like if you stock my pond, go on their website. Call them up. Tell them, say, hey, here's what I'm looking for. And tell them what you want. And then get an assurance of where the fish came from. And, you know, I'm not going to tell you that they're going to be totally honest, because I'm not going to tell you they're going to be dishonest. But what I am going to tell you is that sometimes they get something that they think they get that they don't quite know for sure. Because the guys driving the truck aren't the biologists, and they're not the people that own the fish hatchery. They're driving the truck, and they're getting the fish loaded on. So I would call and ask the source. Ron, catch them with a live bluegill as bait. There you go. Jason, I've tried. Okay, you guys are having a conversation. That's good. Let's see here. We got a conversation going on. Harrison Davis says, use balloons as a bobber. When the big bass take the bluegill, it looks like a scene from Jaws when the drum floats. Yeah, that's good. Micah Jefferson, feeding bluegill is MVP. How many years to reach 10 inches plus southern Indiana? Micah, I'm going to tell you, if you start with fingerlings that you buy from somebody like Matt Rail or one of the fish hatcheries like Jones Fish Farm in Cincinnati, I'm going to tell you it's going to take you 3 years to hit 10 inches plus, probably 4 years to get plus 10 inches. I'm going to say if you start off with, you know, some fish about that long, 2.5, 3 inches long, they'll hit 10 inches by 3 years, by the middle or end part of 3 years, if you feed them twice a day. Ron says, I need to have the pond electrofish. Yes, you do, because that's going to tell you the truth. Nathan Barber, Southern Indiana, looking at adding channel cats to our 4.5 acre. Ooh, we're getting a lot of stuff here. To our 4.5 acre pond, we have largemouth bass, bluegill, I guess red ear sunfish, probably what that means, and crappie. 3 to 5 pound bass are common and don't want to mess with bass catching. If you're looking to add catfish to that 4.5 acre lake, then you need to stock some that are 8 to 10 inches long. When you say you don't want to mess with bass catching, there's two ways to interpret that. One is, I don't care to catch a bass because I don't want to mess with it. The other one is, I don't want the catfish to interfere with the bass. So if you don't want the catfish to mess with the bass, don't stock them any heavier than about 50 per acre. And once they hit 2.5 pounds, start harvesting a few. Better yet, if you've got a 4.5 acre pond, you probably got a smaller pond on the place. Put the catfish in the smaller pond and make it a catfish pond. Do threadfin, shad, and bluegill spawn with the moon cycles, says Jason Nipstead. Yes, they do. They sure do. They spawn in the full moon cycles. When the moon is full, that's when they're spawning, and it's temperature related. Now, threadfin shad, what's interesting about those fish is they spawn as soon as the water temperature hits the mid-60s. And then they continue spawning in cycles of the full moon until the temperature gets up into the mid-80s. Then they slow down. Now, that doesn't mean they quit. And the babies start having babies when they're about 90 days old. The average lifespan of a threadfin shad is 18 months. Not very long. So, bluegills are, now where you are, Jason, bluegill should be spawning 3 to 5 times a year in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Travis Paul Smith, or you can just buy from American Sport Fishing, know what you get. That's absolutely right. If you're really hell-bent on getting good strain Florida largemouth bass, find a hatchery. American Sport Fish Hatchery is a great one. You know, there's others out there as well, but American Sport Fish is my go-to. I believe in those guys. I've known them for a long time. I remember when Barry and Don started, and now they got Robbie and Sawyer and Sean, young guys that have taken it over, and they're passionate about it. They want to do things right. So let's see here. Jonathan Stoddard. Should aeration be cut back in the heat of the summer nights only? 1+ acre pond, 10 to 13 feet maximum depth, 6 to 7 foot average East Texas. Absolutely yes. Jonathan, put a timer on your aeration system and cut it back. Aerate from 9 at night till 9 in the morning. That way you'll take advantage of the cooler part of the day. And here's the mission. You want to keep your water temperature below 83 degrees. If you're aerating full blast all the time, right now, your temperature is going to spike at 87. Maybe a little higher than that. That's too hot. But if you will cut it back to feed from aerate from 9 at night till 9 in the morning, you're going to push your temperature down into the low 80s. That's tolerable. Nathan Barber, 50 per acre sounds good. Thanks. Just told my wife we need to build another pond. What'd she say? Sure, honey. I need a couch. That's what my wife would say. Chance Birch, is it okay to put pond dye in the pond now? The reason to put pond dye in a pond is to eliminate sunlight penetration to less than about a foot. Got a little dry air in here today. Pond dye's purpose is to block the UV rays of the sun and keep plants from growing, or to minimize the risk of algae growing this time of year. Now, one thing you got to remember, this time of year, your baby fish are growing as fast as they can. And when you put that dye in there, you're likely to disrupt their food chain. Now here we are, we're at the end of July going into August. I don't know a real good reason to put pond dye in a pond if you're wanting to protect your fishery. Now, if you've got issues with vegetation and you want to prevent it, that's a decent reason. But if fishery management is your primary goal, I'm not sure I would do that. Okay, Nathan, she said nope. Now, let me tell you about nope. What that really means is not yet. Now, hey guys, listen, I've been married a long time, which we can talk about that later. But the thing is nope means not yet. Now, if you were to show up with a really nice ring, and I don't mean like a ring on a phone, I'm talking about a ring on the finger. If you show up with a really good vehicle, if you show up with something that mama likes, then your odds of yes go up. Now, of course, one thing that she's got to think about is that how can you enhance the value of your property? So if you're going to sell the property at some point, a second pond is going to increase the value. Now, that's an angle you haven't thought about. Don't go talk to her now. She's already said no for today. But there's another day, and I know Wayne and Josie are watching. I hadn't seen them check in, but I know they're out there somewhere, and they know what I'm talking about. Dustin Crawley, in reference to your comments on the hybrid bluegill reproducing, is that the same for the F1s? No. Here's the difference, Dustin. The hybrid bluegill are a true hybrid. They're a cross between two species. These F1 tiger bass are crosses between the same species, different strain. It's like crossing a Labrador retriever with a poodle. You get a Labradoodle. Okay? Whereas if you were to cross a horse with a donkey, you get a mule. A mule is a hybrid. So the hybrid sunfish, the hybrid bluegills, are a cross between two different species. The F1s are crosses between two strains. So you have Florida largemouth bass and you have northern largemouth bass. You cross those two, those babies can reproduce, but they can't reproduce as what they are. It's physically, genetically impossible. It's like in the cattle business, you can take a Hereford bull and cross it with an Angus heifer. The calf is going to be a black baldy. But you cross that black baldy with another black baldy, what are you going to get? You're going to get a Hereford, you're going to get an Angus, you're going to get something else. You don't know what you're going to get. You're going to get some with red, some with black, some with a white face, some without. Okay, let's see. Oh, there's Josie. Yep, here we go. All right, let me see here. Let's see. Harrison Davis says, so what is or are the limiting factors that are preventing a superior genetic female bass living in an aquarium with its own food buffet from maxing out? Exercise, social interactions, yes, and space. 100 gallons is nothing. In the real world, that superior female bass is going to live in millions of gallons of water. She's going to be able to dominate that environment, go when she wants, go where she wants, eat what she wants, when she wants. 100-gallon aquarium, she's going to be able to turn around and look at you. And she's going to be able to suck in a shiner, hit a goldfish, watch TV, whatever you got going on. But she's not going to be able to do what she does. There's Josie. Hey, Josie. We're here together. Believe that. Great show. Electronic hugs. I'll tell Debbie here. I'll see her shortly. Let's see here. Mike Cottrell, I blame all pond improvements on the pond boss. Hey, you know what? I raised a bunch of kids. I ain't taking credit for the good ones, and I'm not taking the blame for the ones that ain't turning out that good. Hey, I'm just trying to teach you. You go make the choice. Thanks for the compliment. Great show, Pond Boss. Thanks for all the wonderful information. You're second only to my pastor. Holy cow. Man, that's a little gospel coming at us right there. Ken Dow, would it be beneficial to add crawfish as a supplemental food for largemouth bass, 2-acre pond in Pennsylvania? Yes, absolutely. Stock native crawfish. Don't go buy some from the grocery store that came out of Louisiana. Don't do that to Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania doesn't deserve it. Well, hey guys, gals, I really appreciate you checking in. 7:30's here. I want to again say thanks to Purina Mills. Thanks for sending me the face mask. I can't wait to go into a grocery store with the checkerboard square dotting on my face. Thanks to Texas Hunter for their feeders. Thanks to David Schneiderman and Easy Doc, Landon Wyatt, Natural Lake Biosciences, John Wilson, Aquadoc. Glad you guys checked in. We've got some superstars watching the show tonight. And I tell you what, I'm not sure where I'll be next Wednesday, but I know I'm going to be hanging out with you. So until then, I'm going to bid you farewell. Say adios. Thanks for joining me. See you later.